You know, President Bush talked about our leadership programming. One of the great aspects of what we do here is I think that we ignite a network, and sometimes the networks work in ways that we don't even expect. I'll tell you a real quick story because, again, everybody here who supports us helps make this stuff happen. We had one of our PLS graduates of this year in New Bern, North Carolina, and he ran some restaurants, and he owned a minor league baseball team in that region. And that town got virtually wiped out in the hurricane. And he put a call into a gentleman who runs Team Rubicon, who was in one of our first PLS class, who had a group of veterans there inside of 6 days. He called a woman who was the PLS class the year before, who was instrumental in Puerto Rico in helping deliver aid, and he called them and said, what am I supposed to do and how? And within a week, he served thousands of people. He kept his restaurants open, and he had his own distribution supply chain kind of lined out thanks to PLS. So real live example that you all make possible. But those are the kinds of networks that when you have leaders that make things happen, they get to work. And Carly, thank you for being here. And I would say that your history is about getting things done. And you have had a remarkable career spanning the corporate world, the nonprofit world, and the political world. And I would just like to start by asking you your perspective over the years transitioning from corporate to political and through the nonprofit. What is your view of leadership, and how have you seen leadership evolve?
Well, first, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mrs. Bush. Thank you, President Bush. Thank you, Ken. And how inspired I was earlier this evening to have an opportunity to meet with the scholars of the We Lead program, just fantastic women, every single one of them, and inspired as well by the panel we heard earlier this evening. So the first thing that I would say about leadership is it's the same no matter what sector you're in. Leadership is the same, whether you're in business or the nonprofit world or the political world. The second thing I would say about leadership is something that you actually said with the examples that you just gave of PLS graduates. Leaders collaborate with others. There's always the myth of the strong man. It's usually a strong man who says, you know, I have a pen and a phone, I alone can fix it. Actually, leaders know that they alone can never achieve results, although they can perhaps have the sense of possibility. A leader needs to collaborate with others. I think we get very confused about the term leader or leadership, and I think it's why so many people are cynical about leadership. If you ask young people, if you poll young people and say, do you want to be a leader, the majority of them will say no these days. And the reason they say no is because they've been so disappointed by people who are called leaders, maybe in the political world, maybe in the business world, maybe in the faith world, but those leaders have disappointed. And so I think leadership actually isn't about position or title, although some leaders have position and title. I think leadership instead is about seeing possibilities. It's about solving problems. It's about collaborating with others. And most importantly, it's about changing the order of things for the better. There are loads of leaders in this country and in this world who have no title, no position. They will never be famous, but they are changing the order of things for the better every single day. And those are the leaders we should lift up. And we saw many of them in the We Lead program here earlier this afternoon.
So in your writing, you've said that leaders are made, not born. Mm-hmm. And with a degree in medieval history.
Yes, odd, isn't it? That's why I started as a secretary.
So, you know, when you think about your path, which was not a straight line, what were kind of the key turning points in your experience where you knew that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to be the one to have to do it?
Well, first, I absolutely believe that leaders are made, not born. I believe that anyone is capable of leadership. But I have come to that belief based on what I now understand leadership to be, that leaders are courageous because they challenge the order of things. They have to have character because character is what keeps you going when the going gets tough, and the going always gets tough. They have to be willing to collaborate with others, which takes the humility to know they can't do it all themselves and the empathy to actually see value in other people, and they have to see possibilities. Those are human characteristics that all of us are capable of. And so leaders are indeed made, not born. I perhaps first learned that from my own story. I was indeed a medieval history major. Yikes. I was a scared, shy, goody two-shoes middle child. The thing I was best at was pleasing my parents. And when I graduated from college with that degree, I had no place to go. I graduated in the middle of a deep recession as a woman. I tried law school. I hated it. I quit. And so I went back to work as a secretary, because that's how I'd put myself through college, was typing and filing and answering the phones. The first turning point in my life came when two men in the little 9-person real estate firm where I was a secretary, two men came to my desk and said, "We've been watching you. We think you could do more than type and file." And the truth is that willingness to see possibilities in me, possibilities that I, at that time, did not see in myself, made all the difference in the world. All of us need someone to take a chance on us, maybe 2 or 3 chances on us. And all of us need a helping hand, and I've needed those things. So that was one turning point. A second turning point was when I finally got my MBA and made it into corporate America, AT&T, a company with 1 million jobs, 1 million people in it. I was a nobody. I was a young woman in a man's world. But what I realized was that there were problems all around me, problems that had festered, problems that everybody talked about at the water cooler, but problems that no one did anything about. And yet, when I asked people who were impacted by the problem what they thought about it, they always had good ideas about how to solve it. And so I started working with other people and solving problems, which is to say that another turning point was when I realized that if you solve problems by collaborating with people who are impacted and understand those problems, good things happen. And so I think in the end, the purpose of leadership is problem solving. And the reason it takes courage is because you have to challenge the way things are to get those problems solved.
And is political leadership, in your mind, different than corporate or
certainly,
society or community?
Well, certainly government is different than business, obviously. On the other hand, I think what's the same is that a leader, not in position or title, but in purpose and motivation, a leader is focused on changing the order of things for the better. A leader is focused on positive impact. A leader is focused on solving problems. And that's the same in business or politics. I think one of the reasons people are so cynical about politics is because they don't see a lot of problems getting solved. George Washington, our first president, noted in his farewell address to the nation in the year 1789, the trouble with political parties is they will come to care only about winning, and they will not care about governing or problem solving. One of the reasons I think the nation now understands the leadership of President and Mrs. Bush is because President Bush, whether you agreed with him all the time or not, he always ran to the problem. And he never was afraid to seek advice from others or to admit mistakes when he'd made them, and he wasn't afraid to take the decisions to correct those mistakes. I think people know leadership when they see it. And I say that not to suck up to the president because he's here or to the First Lady, but because it's true.
So I'd like to take you back to a really powerful year on a number of different fronts in your life. After you left Hewlett-Packard in 2008, you were on the McCain campaign as an advisor. In 2009, you announced for the California Senate the day after you were diagnosed with breast cancer, and that year you also lost your daughter to addiction. But you kept going through the election, through that whole election campaign. Your resilience comes from another place. And what did you lean on at that time, and what can you share with us about really the motivation to keep moving forward?
Well, 2009 was a very difficult year. I had a very difficult bout with cancer, and as you note, we lost our younger daughter, Lori, that same year, in fact, the week after I finished my last radiation treatment. So it was a hard year, without a doubt. I leaned on my faith. I leaned on my family. My husband, Frank, is here with me. He has been the rock of my life ever since the day I met him. But I also learned in those very, very difficult times, and we all have them. That is life. We all have difficult times. I learned that in the tough times, there are also always great blessings if we will see them. And one of the great blessings that I found in that difficult time was how strong the love of my family truly was, how strong my faith truly was, and how kind strangers could be. I mean, I still remember strangers' faces when I was dealing with all of this. I don't remember their names, but I remember their faces. I remember what they said to me at that time. We all have only so much time. And I think the time that we have, we are supposed to make a positive contribution. It was that year, I think, that I learned that life isn't measured in time. A life is measured in love and in moments of grace and in positive contribution. I've been blessed with love. I hope I have moments of grace, and it is up to all of us to make a positive contribution.
Your messages have been so uniformly positive and optimistic. In today's world, you mentioned the cynicism. Do you think it's possible for an optimist to ascend to the White House?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, we have one who did. I mean, both President and Mrs. Bush have always been optimistic about their nation, about our role in the world. But I think you're asking a serious question. One of the pieces of advice that I give to young people a lot is right after I say, get a job, any job. It doesn't matter. Just get a job and do the job well and you'll learn a lot. But after that piece of advice, I say, look, you're going to run into two kinds of people in your life. There are people who tear you down, and there are people who lift you up. Go to the people who lift you up. And I think it is true for all of us. Yes, there are a lot of cynical, negative, ignorant, divisive voices in our politics now, in our nation now, in the world now. And much of what we see on technology. I mean, I'm from the technology world. I think technology is a wonderful tool, but I also think technology brings negative things. And one of the things technology brings is this relentless negativity. I mean, let's face it, most of the commentary in social media is not positive, it's negative. And so it can really weigh on people. And yet, it is always true that optimism, the ability to see possibilities in the circumstances around you, in the people around you, gets more things done. And so I think we as citizens, we as leaders in our communities, we as people need to remember the advice I give to young people. Try not to spend too much time or attention on the people or the commentary that tears you down, and go to the people and the commentary that lifts you up.
So speaking of lifting up, I'm going to ask a question about what she's working on now, but we're also going to have a couple of mics roving around that we'd like to open it up for questions in the time we have remaining. In 2014, you started your Unlocking Potential project, and your executive director is here with us. And I'd like you to explain both the inspiration and also the progress, because it's a very exciting endeavor.
So I have spent a lifetime trying to lift up, train, develop leaders. Leaders, that is, people who see possibilities, who have courage and character, who collaborate with others for the purpose of solving problems and changing the order of things for the better. And through Carly Fiorina Enterprises, I've done a lot of that work in the for-profit world. But what I've learned is that we have these incredible people in our social sector and our nonprofit world who are dealing with incredibly difficult problems, festering problems, problems of illiteracy, of poverty, of addiction, of abuse. And these incredible people, homelessness, don't get always the same investment in problem-solving capacity or the development of leadership skills that folks, for example, in government or the for-profit sector do. And so my husband Frank and I fund and founded the Unlocking Potential Foundation specifically for the purpose of investing in people in the social sector who are dealing with festering problems. And so we work with Wounded Warriors, with Easter SEALs, with Job Corps, with Doctors Without Borders, all incredible organizations with incredible people who are facing very difficult problems and who, just like all the rest of us, need someone to say, you have potential, you can lead, you can solve this problem. We're doing an event in Washington, D.C. next week with a homeless population. We are working with folks in very impoverished communities to help them take more responsibility and have better health outcomes. One of the things that I've learned over and over and over again is something my mother taught me when I was 8 years old. My mother said to me when I was 8, what you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God. What I've learned over and over is that everyone is gifted by God. Everyone has potential. And when we judge people based on their circumstances, their appearance, their belief, their parentage, we are overlooking their God-given potential. Everyone has God-given gifts and more potential than they realize. And all of us will be better off if we can lift people up, unlock their potential, and turn them into leaders wherever they are, so they can solve the problems right in front of them, which they understand better than those of us who are far away.
Very inspirational. Thank you for that. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get you a mic quick. Pierce.
Ms. Fiorina, thank you so much for your attendance and your insight tonight. For those of us who all share the desire to actually change some of the most difficult situations in our society, how have you chosen to evaluate the metrics of the nonprofit situations that you are involved with and making a difference and deciding whether to continue to support them? Because I think that's something that, from a business background, a lot of us want to make a difference, but have difficulty on evaluation metrics of making a difference. Thanks.
Yes. Well, it's a really interesting topic. How do you measure impact? And one of the things that we stress in our programming is that metrics are key. In fact, one of the things I bring from the business world is a belief that what gets measured is what gets done. Because if you're measuring something, people think it's important. So I will tell you very honestly, there are a lot of organizations who aren't used to measuring things. And so one of the things that we bring to them is a requirement. There are things you must measure. So we have a framework that we use for problem solving, and we start by asking people, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? We then ask them to think about who has to do what in order for those goals to be achieved. How do we need to behave with each other? What's the culture in order for these goals to be achieved? And then we spend a lot of time on how are you going to measure success? How are you going to track your results? In some cases, people have never thought about that before. But the rigor of actually thinking through what do we want to measure has an impact right there. So what I would say to you, if you're a donor or you're looking to make an impact, don't necessarily reject an organization that hasn't thought through measurement, but ask them to begin thinking through. How do you want to track your success? How do you want to measure your results? Just the fact that you ask the question, believe it or not, will cause people to be thoughtful about what they're actually trying to achieve. Yes, we have a very specific framework. We call it the problem-solving framework. In a shameless advertisement, I will say, go to carlyfiorina.com, and you can find the framework, but it's very fundamental. It's very simple. It's a very powerful tool, and it literally, from my experience, works in every setting to get people to start thinking about how to measure, what to measure, so that you actually make progress.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Olfa. I'm part of the We Lead program. I come from Tunisia. I think it's not a question, but more I relate your story to mine. I also started as assistant, but serving a women economic empowerment program. And I remember myself crying a lot because I was like trying to find my path, you know, and advance my career. I didn't have any role model or any person to guide me. It was like myself learning how to overcome all this program. It was a very, you know, I suffered a lot, but I, as you said, I surrounded myself with a positive person who believed in me. And this morning, someone asked me, who is your role model? And I remember myself also, you know, answering, it's my mother. You know, it's a very typical, you know, answer, but it was my answer. It was my mother, because she's coming from a very conservative family. But I remember since I was a child, she kept telling me, be an independent woman. Don't let yourself, you know, be served, even whether, you know, under a male or a female, you know, power. So thank you so much, and thank you, the Bush Institute, for this opportunity. It's very important to bring all those women from different countries, from Afghanistan, Egypt, Lebanon, Tunisia, and which other country? Jordan, sorry, of course. I mean, I know I'm going to Jordan actually in November. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So,
Thank you.
And Carly, so who do you who was your role model, and who did you look up to that was very impactful in your life?
Well, we were having this discussion earlier today with the We Scholars. I think my first role model, first of all, when I was coming up, we didn't use those terms. We didn't talk about role models, and we didn't talk about mentors, honestly. Those are relatively new terms. But honestly, my first role model was probably my mother. Although my father was also a huge inspiration and I adored him, but my mother was one of the, she did not work outside the home, but she was an incredibly brave woman. Her mother died when she was very young. She grew up with literally the proverbial evil stepmother. While she was the top of her class and the valedictorian of her high school, her father wouldn't send her to college, so she ran away. She got on a bus and ended up in Texas at a military base and eventually met my dad. And she always said, she was the one who said, what you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God. At a relatively young age, I saw my first woman manager. She turned out to be a very dear friend of my husband Frank's and mine. We were married in her home, but it was a revelation to me because she was extremely pregnant when I saw her the first time. And I just remember, this is a superficial thing to say, but I remember she was wearing these killer heels. I love shoes. Anyway, she had these killer shoes on, and she was so pregnant, and she had these great legs, and she's running around in charge. I thought, wow, this is what's possible. But what I also... But what I also said earlier this afternoon, and it's the truth, there have been as many men who have lifted me up as there have been women who have lifted me up. I have had men role models and women role models. I have looked at men and learned what not to do, and I have looked at some women and learned what not to do. And one of the things that I think it's so important for us to know is that it's just, and we talked about this in the wonderful panel earlier this evening, it's not just women's job to lift up women. We got a lot of problems in the world. And the only limitless resource we have to solve those problems is human potential. And women have half of it. And so if we want the world to be better, if we want problems solved, men and women of all kinds, in all circumstances, of all appearances, need to be fully engaged. That's what makes the world a better place.
So you've written that the biggest issue in the United States is untapped potential.
Yes.
And tonight, you've imparted on us that what we make of ourselves is our gift to God. Your gift is having been here with us today and tonight. And I want to end on those great words of encouragement and optimism because it's an absolutely wonderful message for all of us to take home. Thank you so much for being such an inspiration, Carla.
Thank you so much. Thank you.